If you have around 10 minutes, I'm going to show how you can recreate this in Photoshop. The first thing I went ahead and did was load my first player image onto the canvas, and then I went straight into Camera Raw filter. And the main things that I focused on applying to the graphic or to this picture was I wanted to lower the blacks just a little bit and increase the texture and increase the clarity. And then I also increased the vibrance a little bit. The last thing I went ahead and added was some sharpening, and then this is what it looked like after. And the reason I like to do this sometimes is just so whenever I do this right here, which is go to the object selection tool and then click select subject and then select and mask, it does a better job of masking the player whenever I add the camera filter first. And then obviously right here, after I selected the subject using the selection tool, it didn't mask everything that I wanted because it still kept this bottom part right here, which was part of the Instagram picture. So I just went ahead and went over to the brush tool and then make sure the color is on black. So then you can kind of click around it a little bit and erase everything you need to. And then I went ahead and made it a black and white layer, or added a black and white layer. And then clicking that little arrow like I just did, it makes sure that the black and white layer is only affecting this player image. Because whenever I start to add in more player images and then background pictures, I don't want the black and white layer to affect it. And then I did the same thing by adding that levels layer. I just clicked the little arrow to make sure it's only affecting that player image. And then I just used the levels layer to make the picture look darker. Then right here, I went ahead and added in the next player image that I'm going to use. And then I go over to the selection tool and then click select subject. And then it will take you over here. And the only thing that I usually mess with is the shift edge, because it just keeps in, or it helps take away the outer, sometimes like an outer layer that's wrapping around the player, or certain parts there will be like a black line that's outlining the leg or the arm. So I just like to sometimes bring that down to get rid of that. And right here, I'm just using the brush tool to soften up this player image. I don't want the lines like that. I just want to kind of make it look like it's fading into the graphic. And I'm also going to end up taking the player image away right here with the white jersey, and I'm not going to keep the orange part that's in the graphic. I was just trying out with those two things, but I ended up finding a better background to go with the graphic, and I thought only one player image at the bottom looked better with it. The next thing I went ahead and did was add a black and white layer to this player image, and then I added a levels layer. And the levels layer, as you can see right here, is to make it darker. And I didn't want to keep the whole player image black and white, so I went over back to the black and white layer, and I added a layer mask to it. And then I went over to the brush tool, and once again, make sure the color's on black. And then I just draw over what I want to add back, or the color that I want to add back. And that's why you want to make sure you add a layer mask to the black and white layer and not the player image layer, because you just want to affect the color and not the actual player image. And then the next thing that I went ahead and did was add the Chicago skyline to the background. So I found a good picture on Google and then made sure to drag the layer all the way to the bottom as the lowest layer, or one of the lowest layers. And then whenever I get it down here, I lower the opacity a little bit, and then I create a layer mask on this layer. And before I did that, I went over here to add a black and white layer to it and a levels layer like I did before. And then also, like I did before, you want to make sure you click the small box right here, small box and arrow, just to make sure that black and white layer and the levels layer is only affecting the background that you want it to. Because whenever you don't add those things, it starts to mess everything up whenever it's not organized like that. And then, like I said earlier, you're going to add a layer mask to the skyline image, and then you're going to go over to the brush tool and make sure it's on black. And then you're going to draw around, or not draw around, but you're going to brush around and just try to fade it. Because I didn't want this background to be to fill up the entire graphic. I just wanted really just the top buildings to show. And then after I got it looking somewhat like that, I wanted to add the part of the Bear Stadium in. And I used a few different pictures, and this is the one that I found to look the best. So I went ahead and added it into the bottom part of the graphic. And my goal with this was to try to get it to look like it's kind of fading in to the buildings, the Chicago skyline. So the way that I did that was first creating a layer mask and then going back over to the brush tool after making sure it's on black. And it took me a few times using the brush tool, but eventually I kind of figured out what I wanted to do with it to make it look like it's fading into the skyline image. But you can just click around using the brush tool and messing with different opacity settings just to try to see what looks best for you. The next thing I did was I wanted to add some shadows underneath the player image right here, right underneath his feet. So in order to create realistic shadows, what I found to work pretty good is starting with like a smaller brush, right around, see, mine's right around 50 right now at 54, and then creating or adding in some shadows right wherever his feet are hitting the floor, and then creating another layer, and then changing the brush size to be a little bit bigger, and then creating the rest of the shadow and making sure the opacity is lower than the first set of shadows that you added. And I like to do it this way because just naturally, wherever his feet are going to be hitting the floor, that's where the shadow would be darker. So that's why I want to make sure the layers, the first set of layers that I added where his feet are touching the floor, are the darker ones. And then all I did right here was just go over to the gradient tool, and you can pause to see exactly like what I clicked, what the gradient tool layer is and all that. But after you get over there, I just swiped up while I'm on the gradient layer, so I can kind of get this orange that I wanted. And then right here, I just wanted to see which looked better between the bear's blue that they have and the bear's orange. And I ended up going with the orange. But the reason I added this picture right here with both the blue and the orange was so that I could see just like back to back which one looked better. So I could click on it and just check live. And then I went to Texture Labs after that because I wanted to add in a dark background that had some texture to it instead of just creating a solid color layer that's black, which I ended up doing anyway, to make it as dark as I wanted, which is what I do right here. I go over to the bottom layer and then click solid color and then make it black. And to make it darker, I wanted to make sure the layer that I added with the texture isn't all the way at 100%, so then the background can show more. And the reason you can't see a darker background yet is because there's still a few layers that are above it that I had to get in, or I had to mess with in order for the black background to really show, which you will see in a few minutes. And then all I was doing right here was just adding in the player's name, and I added in a rectangle that I didn't keep, as you'll see here in a second. So I'm not going to really explain that. All I used was the rectangle tool, but I kind of liked how it looked here instead of with the rectangle. But I did keep the blue check mark that I just found on Google. And then right here, this was just to add some texture, but I found a white grid that I thought might look good in the graphic. So I just dragged that onto the canvas, and then I messed with it by putting it as one of the lower layers. And then I just used the brush tool to touch it up a little bit. And after doing that, this is kind of what it looked like. Just you can kind of see it faded in the background a little bit. And then the last thing I did was I wanted to add the final camera raw filter to the entire graphic. So in order to do that on the Mac, like masking all the layers together to add a camera raw filter, you just hold down Command, Option, Shift, and E at the same time, and it will mask all the layers together. And the main thing that I wanted to try to add to this graphic was I really wanted to add a good amount of vibrance and texture and lower the blacks to, like I said earlier, I wanted to make the black kind of pop in the background. And I wanted the dominant colors to just be the black and the orange. So I go down here to the saturation layer, and I drag the orange layer pretty far to the right because I wanted it to be black at the top and then kind of have the background in the middle. And then I wanted the orange at the bottom to be pretty prominent. Then after I add just a little bit of sharpening, this is the final result. And if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. And I'm going to be dropping more videos like this in a few days. So if you would like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.